As humans, we all have fundamental needs, such as food, water, and shelter. To satisfy these needs, we must either create or acquire what's necessary. And to do that, we require energy. Several thousand years ago, if you wanted to eat, you had to go out and gather some fruit or hunt down prey. And you would certainly want to spend less energy, because it's hardwired into us to put in less effort while getting the maximum outcome. That's pretty much the definition of efficiency. And if you wanted to do that more efficiently, you started making tools that give you a greater outcome with the same effort. For example, it took far less energy to kill a mammoth with a sharpened spear than with your bare hands. Or you can make a shovel so you can dig far better than you could with your hands, while using almost the same amount of energy. And that applies to almost every aspect of our lives. There's even a way to maximize the outcome without doing more, and that's by getting someone or something else to do the work for you. Either way, the source of energy was always a living creature, whether it was a human doing almost everything, a horse carrying goods or people, a dog guarding cattle, a cat catching mice, or even trained seals sent to hunt enemies on distant shores. For most of human history, production was powered by sheer physical effort. Living beings, humans or animals, were the engines. The energy always came from muscle. The only exception that comes to mind was the sailing ship, which borrowed its power from the wind. And that's how it stayed, right up until the 17th and 18th centuries, when fuel entered the scene and completely changed the game. So that's what happened. At some point, people discovered substances in the ground or on the surface that could burn for a long time and produce a lot of heat. Later, they figured out how to convert that heat into mechanical energy. They used coal to boil water, and the resulting steam would turn a turbine or some other mechanism, which in turn set things in motion. And that's when we started getting energy from something other than muscle power. And unlike the wind, we could control it. So we upgraded ships, and they started running on coal instead of relying on the wind. And we built something new, like locomotive, which also burned coal. Later, we obtained gasoline from oil, which, as I understand it, produces more power and doesn't require water to produce steam. This allowed us to build engines that were both more powerful and more compact, which we then used in cars. Just think about the source of energy we've gained access to. An average locomotive can pull about 1,500 tons at a speed of around 100 km, a regular occurrence in our time. Now imagine what you would have had to do to move 1,500 tons from one place to another 300 years ago. Or think about a car, your own personal vehicle, that you can hop into at night and drive to another city or even another country 500 kilometers away on a freeway lit by electricity and arrive there by morning. That's a luxury that even the most powerful people couldn't have back then. What allows us to do that is the energy source, energy that we don't produce ourselves. It comes from the remains of creatures and plants that lived hundreds of millions of years ago, which were compressed in the ground over millions of years, and turned into the very fuel we use today. So I started wondering, what happens when our oil supply eventually runs out? Because it probably will at some point. You can't really deny that. We can't simply produce oil since it takes millions of years to form. Well, we still have nuclear power plants. I've read that a single bucket of plutonium can produce as much energy as about 9,000 wagons of coal. But you can't build cars that run on it, nor most construction machines. I suppose that's because of the scale involved. Since aircraft carriers powered by nuclear reactors are around 300 meters long, there are only about 200 nuclear-powered ships in the world, compared to roughly 1.5 billion cars. And let's not forget, to build those ships, to extract and transport plutonium, and to construct nuclear or wind power plants, you still need machines that run on combustion engines. All right, what about electric cars? They're more expensive, have a shorter driving range, and their batteries lose capacity over time. Charging them takes a long time, and the charging infrastructure is still limited. Because of all that, they're not yet widely adopted. Even if we're being optimistic, by the time we run out of oil, electric vehicles might make up only about 20% of the total, which would still be impressive, to be fair. Hopefully, we'll continue to make progress in that field, but I still don't believe civilization would avoid collapse. The shift isn't just about the car itself. It's about building out charging infrastructure, upgrading power grids, scaling battery production, and addressing resource limits like lithium and rare earth metals. Those challenges take decades, not years. And once civilization collapses, you wouldn't be able to maintain or support those 20% electric cars anyway. Without infrastructure, spare parts, and a stable power grid, they'd quickly become useless. Not to forget how many things are produced from oil, even parts for electric cars. Plastics, synthetic rubber for tires, lubricants, paints, insulation materials, and many types of composites all rely on petroleum products. And unlike cars, there are no fully electric planes. In fact, there aren't any aircraft that run on anything other than oil-derived fuels. So after an oil shortage or oil depletion, aviation as we know it would come to a halt. Some might suggest biofuel. Well, I've looked into it, but I haven't yet found any mass-produced car that actually runs entirely on it. I also researched the different types of biofuel, and every one I came across still contains at least 80% regular diesel or gasoline. Maybe that's about to change. Maybe we'll see real progress in that field, but for now, that's simply not the case. Even if biofuels advance significantly, think about the sheer scale of infrastructure we would need to transform. For over 2 centuries, we've built an entire global system around oil. Billions of vehicles engineered specifically for diesel or gasoline. Supply chains optimized for extracting and transporting crude. Vast networks of refineries designed to process it. And countless industries that depend on those fuels. Replacing all of that isn't just about creating a new fuel. It's about re-engineering an entire civilization's backbone. Oil is the irreplaceable foundation on which our civilization was built, and the very fuel it still runs on. And yet, it's a resource that will inevitably come to an end with no true replacement in sight. Some estimates suggest that the world's proven oil reserves are equal to about 48 years of current annual consumption. Let's be optimistic and assume we discover more and effectively double that amount. Rounding it off, we could say we might have roughly 100 years of oil left. So what awaits us? It's reasonable to think that not all countries will lose access to oil at the same time. Some nations will run out of oil or lose the ability to obtain it long before the world as a whole does. Without the resources, money, or political power needed to secure oil, and because most of those countries lack alternative energy sources such as nuclear power plants, wind farms, or large-scale solar installations, these countries could be pushed back toward a pre-industrial state. Their governments would likely collapse, leading to chaos. That chaos could trigger famine, outbreaks of disease, and possibly even internal conflicts or civil wars. These countries are usually unstable even today. In some, a new dictator or general comes to power every 2 years, while in others, the leaders have held power for decades. In times of oil shortages, it will become more difficult for such dictators to maintain power over large regions, leading to the rise of several smaller leaders who will try to take control of individual areas. The remaining countries that won't collapse immediately can generally be divided into 2 types: those that will have oil reserves of their own, and those that will be able to afford it, whether due to political, economic, or some other form of power. The buyers, just like today, are often the most powerful countries in the world. During periods of oil shortages, the powerful countries might no longer be able to afford oil because prices will rise and make buying it less worthwhile. Most likely, if we remember the less peaceful side of human nature, this will lead to conflicts over control of those oil fields. Given that oil will soon run out, it is very likely that some countries will initiate military conflicts over the remaining oil fields, naturally under the pretense of liberating them from someone. The prospect that all military technology will become useless once the oil is gone will also push the countries with the largest armies to use that technology while they still can. I think the USA will take control of Venezuela, which may have even more oil than Saudi Arabia. No country in the world can challenge the US militarily, especially not within the Western Hemisphere, so they would likely gain control of Venezuela with little to no resistance. The US also has its own oil reserves, and combined with Venezuela's and possibly those of other countries in the region, this would give them enough time before running out of fuel. Because of this, They probably wouldn't be interested in getting involved in costly wars overseas that would consume large amounts of expensive fuel. As for the Middle East, I believe there will be a war there, regardless of whether we run out of oil or not. It's possible that some countries will attempt to annex new territories during that time, hoping they won't face resistance because of the global crisis. They might also count on the fact that, once oil supplies are exhausted, no one would be able to retake those territories, since effective offensive weapons like fighter jets and tanks would no longer be operational. In today's world, a war in one country can cause food shortages or drive up prices in nations on entirely different continents. That shows how interconnected and fragile our global food supply is. Imagine what will happen when a global crisis and wars start because of the oil shortage. After oil is gone, widespread famine is very likely, because every stage of modern agriculture depends on oil. Producing food isn't just planting seeds. It involves operating tractors, harvesters, and irrigation systems that run on fuel. Fertilizers and pesticides are often made from petroleum products. Seeds, equipment, and raw materials are transported over long distances, all relying on oil-powered logistics. Without oil, moving crops from farms to processing facilities, then to markets, becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible, on the scale we rely on today. In short, without oil, large-scale modern agriculture, growing, harvesting, processing, and distributing food would collapse, making it impossible to feed the current global population. Because of this, many people would die, and almost every government would collapse. The result would be a world largely without electricity, with only a few scattered exceptions. Instead, there would be small, self-organized communities focused purely on survival. Daily life would revolve around securing food, mostly through hunting and gathering, supplemented by small gardens. There would be no electricity, no telephones, and no modern water supply systems. People would gather firewood to cook and fetch water from rivers or wells. Encounters with people from neighboring communities might happen only once or twice a year. Horses would return to the roles they had filled for thousands of years, becoming the primary means of transportation. With no fast communication networks or transportation systems to support a centralized government, power would naturally fragment. Each community would develop its own leader, focused on local survival and defense. Over time, some of these communities might grow stronger and begin expanding their influence over weaker neighbors. A powerful leader, perhaps a chief or local lord, could impose taxes on nearby settlements, demanding a share of their resources or labor. In exchange for protection or stability, the classic justification for extortion, smaller communities would be compelled to pledge loyalty, pay tribute, and provide military support when called upon. This arrangement would give rise to a hierarchy, where local leaders owe allegiance to more powerful rulers above them, forming a patchwork of dependent territories. In effect, society would regress into a form of feudalism. Have you ever thought about how, when we talk about ancient times, we often speak of great philosophers and scientists, of extraordinary achievements, magnificent Greek temples, Roman aqueducts and amphitheaters, paved roads spanning entire empires, sophisticated legal systems like Roman law, breakthroughs in mathematics and astronomy, and political innovations such as democracy in Athens or the Roman Republic. These civilizations left behind literature, art, and engineering feats that still inspire us today. But when we talk about the Middle Ages, a very different image comes to mind. Endless wars between rival lords and kingdoms, brutal invasions, famines, religious persecution, and devastating epidemics like the Black Death that wiped out a third of Europe's population. Cities shrank, trade routes collapsed, literacy declined, and much of the ancient knowledge was forgotten or lost. For many, daily life was short, violent, and uncertain, a far cry from the flourishing culture of Greece and Rome. And keep in mind, that golden age of progress came before the later decline. Human civilization didn't always move forward, it actually downgraded. That alone is a precedent in our history. So if we consider the possibilities for our own future, what are the chances that our civilization will simply continue as it is, rather than experience another collapse? To me, the second scenario, another downgrade, seems far more likely. And when you realize that the very foundation our civilization is built upon, its essential resources, its fuel, its lifeblood, is running out, that collapse begins to look not just possible, but ultimately inevitable.